From now on, we're going to encounter numbers as a means of understanding and controlling musical composition. So this is a good moment to talk about how the composer ought to approach Schillinger techniques. Whatever musical background you come from, it should be that your existing knowledge will complement this new approach and enhance your general understanding of music. But you may find that gaining mastery and fluency over new methods seems awkward at first. One of the main barriers is being able to translate quickly between music in your head, numbers on a page, and finally music symbols, and vice versa. Personally, I experience different kinds of thinking when I compose, an inner intuitive experience of musical sound and an intellectual process involving empirical decision making and speculation about the likely outcome of a plan. These two kinds of thinking can drive one another. Guesswork may provoke the imagination, which in turn may fuel the next experiment. The inner impression of music is not like a recorded performance of a finished composition. It may only be a glimmer of a rhythm or a melody, something that distinguishes itself momentarily from the general flow of creative thought. Sometimes the catalyst of inspiration isn't a sound at all, but some extra musical stimulus that helps trigger a flow of musical ideas. Words often suggest movements, characters and moods, and so the source of creativity may be contained in a phrase of poetry, the title of a story, or a mnemonic tag. Extra musical ideas are most potent when they can be interpreted as actions. The movements of rivers or storms or animals, Charlie the Bird Parker for instance, are all potent sources of musical inspiration. One approach to creative decision making is to pose a series of questions intended to stimulate the imagination into providing answers. What quality of movement should the music possess? What real-life movements are reflected in the music? What psychic state is to be experienced by the listener? This isn't an invitation to produce program music along the lines of, say, Richard Strauss's Sinfonia Domestica, parts of which are intended as depictions of family life, scenes from baby's bath time, for instance. It's more a suggestion that to externalize the music may help in its rendering and possibly its power to communicate. Numbers may reveal new forms and new ideas, but it would be wrong to think that these mean anything unless you have the imagination to spot the meaning. Schillinger techniques will almost never generate satisfactory music without imaginative guidance. For one thing, most of the techniques produce too much choice. Taste and discrimination are essential if one is to deal with the vast number of alternative possibilities. Only the inner ear can limit the potential outcomes, stimulate the powers of invention, and guide you towards elegant and effective music. While creating and appreciating music is not a completely rational process like a scientific investigation, but its rendering and execution frequently requires a practical approach. The composer must ask questions. Can a performer play this music? Is this phrase long enough? How do I connect these two ideas? The questions are very similar for an architect or an engineer, for instance. Can this bridge be built? Is it big enough? How should these areas be linked? We assume that the architect and the engineer have hard information about forces and tolerances, angles, and that this has influenced their approach to the execution of the project. Can this same kind of information be brought into the craft of composition? Perhaps music's different. After all, a bad symphony's not going to fall and crush anybody. But on the other hand, some technique, skill or craft might just save the day, or, less dramatically, allow you to render your ideas more accurately. At the end of his life, the composer Rossini was asked about his success, which he put down to a good ear for melody and a little science. Schillinger expresses much the same idea in stricter tones when he says that his system, and I quote, does not circumscribe the freedom of an individual artist, but merely releases him from vagueness by helping him to analyse and to realise his own creative tendencies. How deliberately and effectively this science can be used depends on the individual temperament of the composer. As mentioned earlier, some people take to these methods more easily than others. Gershwin had written hundreds of published songs, many of them hits, before he began to study with Schillinger, so clearly he didn't need technical help, but he sought it because he wanted to exceed his already remarkable achievements.